The elevator doors had barely closed behind her when Elena Marsh felt the last 3 years of her life crack open like glass under pressure. She stood frozen in the marble lobby, her resignation letter still warm from the printer, clutched so tightly in her hand that the paper had begun to crease into her palm. Behind her, the office she had given everything to buzzed on, oblivious, as if she had never mattered there at all. If you believe in stories about second chances, about people who get knocked down and rise back up stronger, hit that like button right now, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, share this with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Humanity Tales so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's continue. 3 years earlier, Elena had walked into Kensington and Cole Advertising as a nervous junior analyst with a second-hand blazer and a notebook full of ideas nobody had asked for yet. She had nothing but her work ethic and a stubborn belief that if she simply tried harder than everyone else, someone would eventually notice. And for a while, it seemed like that belief was paying off. She stayed late when the interns went home. She rewrote campaign pitches at midnight because she saw a flaw no one else caught. She took client calls on weekends without complaint, because to her, this job wasn't just a paycheck. It was proof that she could build something out of nothing, the way her mother once told her successful people always do. Daniel Cole, the company's sharp-eyed creative director and one of its founding partners, had noticed her early. He wasn't a man who handed out praise carelessly, but there had been moments, quiet ones, where his eyes lingered on her work a second too long before he nodded and said simply, "Good, keep going." For Elena, that was enough fuel to keep running herself into the ground for years. She told herself it wasn't about being seen. It was about doing the work right. But somewhere beneath that professional armor, a small and very human part of her had begun to hope that all this effort would eventually mean something more than a paycheck, that it would mean being chosen. The promotion to senior creative lead had been the position everyone in the office quietly understood was hers. She had led the Whitmore campaign that saved the agency's biggest account. She had trained 2 junior hires who now outperformed people twice their experience. She had sacrificed birthdays, a serious relationship, and more sleep than she cared to admit, all while telling herself that loyalty and hard work were a language every good employer eventually learned to read. So when Daniel gathered the team on a gray Tuesday morning and announced that Marcus Webb, a charismatic new hire who had been with the company for barely 8 months, would be stepping into the senior creative lead role, something inside Elena didn't just crack. It shattered. She sat in that conference room, her hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles went white, while the rest of the team clapped politely for a man who had spent more time networking at rooftop parties than staying late to fix broken campaigns. She smiled the way people smile when they are trying not to cry in public. She nodded when Daniel caught her eye, as if searching for some silent confirmation that she understood, that this was somehow fair, that her 3 years of invisible sacrifice had simply not been enough. That night she didn't go home right away. She sat in her car in the parking garage for almost an hour, the engine off, the city lights blinking indifferently through the windshield, and she asked herself the question that so many hardworking, overlooked people eventually ask in the quiet dark of their own disappointment. What was the point of trying so hard if trying was never going to be enough? By morning, her decision was made. She typed her resignation letter in under 10 minutes, her fingers moving faster than her doubts could catch up to her. She didn't want a farewell party. She didn't want sympathy or gossip. She simply wanted to walk out the door with whatever dignity she had left, and never look back at a place that had taught her, in the cruelest way possible, that being good at your job was never the same as being valued for it. Daniel found out about her resignation almost by accident, scrolling through an internal email thread 20 minutes after she'd already cleared out her desk. He read it twice, his stomach tightening in a way that surprised him, before he was even out of his chair. He told himself it was simply about protecting the agency's biggest asset, that losing Elena mid-quarter would be an operational disaster no sane director could ignore. But if he was honest with himself, somewhere beneath the panic, there was something quieter and far more uncomfortable stirring, something that felt suspiciously like guilt. He caught up to her in the lobby, right as the elevator doors were closing, his voice cutting through the polished silence louder than he intended. "Elena, wait." She didn't turn around immediately. When she finally did, her eyes were dry, but there was a rawness in them that told him she had been fighting tears the entire elevator ride down. He asked her, almost breathlessly, why she hadn't come to him first. Why she hadn't given him the chance to explain, to fix things, to talk it through like the professionals they had always been with each other. And that was the moment something in Elena finally broke free. The words she had swallowed for 3 years spilling out in the middle of a marble lobby, with strangers walking past pretending not to listen. She told him she had given this company everything. She told him about the nights she'd missed her sister's birthday because a client needed last-minute revisions. She told him about the promotion she'd been quietly promised in conversations that apparently meant nothing when it came time to actually decide. She told him that watching Marcus accept a role she had earned with 3 years of her life, while people clapped as if it were the natural order of things, had made her feel invisible in a way she never wanted to feel again. Daniel stood there, uncharacteristically silent, absorbing every word like a man finally seeing clearly something that had been standing directly in front of him for years. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than she had ever heard it. He admitted that the decision to promote Marcus hadn't been entirely his. The board had pushed for someone with what they called fresh energy and external polish, someone who photographed well for client pitches and charmed board members at dinners. He admitted, painfully, that he had let politics override merit, and that he had told himself he would find a way to make it up to her later, not realizing that later might never come if she walked out that door. It wasn't the kind of apology that fixes everything instantly. Elena didn't melt into forgiveness, and she didn't take back her resignation on the spot. But something had shifted between them in that lobby, a crack of honesty neither of them had expected. She told him she needed time to think, and for the first time in 3 years, Daniel didn't try to control the outcome. He simply nodded, told her the offer to reconsider would remain open, and let her walk away. Over the following 2 weeks, Elena did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in years. She rested. She let herself grieve, not just the job, but the version of herself that had believed loyalty alone would be enough. She spent mornings walking through the city without an agenda, evenings reconnecting with the sister whose birthdays she had missed, and quiet nights wondering what it might feel like to build something for herself instead of for someone else's company. During that time, Daniel didn't disappear either. He went to the board alone and made a case he had never had the courage to make before, that talent without recognition breeds resentment, and that companies who overlook their best people in favor of image will eventually lose everything worth having. It cost him some political capital, and it strained a few relationships in that boardroom, but for the first time, he chose to fight for something instead of simply managing around it. When he finally called Elena again, it wasn't to beg her to come back to the same broken system. It was to offer her something entirely different, a newly created leadership position, one designed specifically around the strength she had spent 3 years proving, with a seat at decisions that actually mattered, and safeguards in writing this time, not just quiet, unspoken promises. Elena sat with the offer for 3 days before she said yes, not because the apology had erased the pain, but because for the first time, she felt like her worth had finally been seen, named, and protected out loud instead of assumed silently in the dark. If this story moved you even a little, if it reminded you of your own quiet battles to be seen and valued, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear that their hard work is not invisible. And before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something important. Comment the word "seen" below if you've ever felt overlooked despite giving your best, because I want to know how many of you out there have lived a piece of Elena's story too. In the months that followed, Elena rebuilt her place in that company, not as the woman who once quietly hoped to be noticed, but as someone who had learned in the hardest way possible that real respect is never something you beg for. It's something you eventually demand, walk away from if necessary, and only return to when it's finally offered the way it always should have been, without hesitation and without conditions.